Hi and welcome to this CPI webinar short. Today I'm going to be talking about the changes to the DfE statutory guidance around suspensions and exclusions and what it means operationally and culturally for schools when it comes into effect on the 26th of July. So, on top of everything else which happens in this final half term, exams, rewards trips, end of term events, we also need to make sure our schools are compliant come September when everyone's back from the summer break. Whenever new guidance comes out, it is important to compare it to the previous guidance. Sometimes very little has actually changed, and for school leaders to adapt school policy and procedure doesn't take long at all. Sometimes there are considerable changes which we have to digest, consider and take time to embed these changes into our own policy and practice effectively. So what has changed from the last guidance, which was brought out, like I said, back in August 2024? Firstly, the document is no longer just guidance, but it is now statutory, and for the first time ever, maintained schools, academies and PRUs are all operating under the same statutory framework. Within the whole document, there has been a considered change to the language used around suspension and exclusion. It has moved from both being sometimes necessary as a last resort to suspensions are sometimes necessary and exclusions should only be used as a last resort. Let's be honest, this is what the best practices always look like. But schools now need to be able to evidence the strategies, interventions and support that were considered before a permanent exclusion was reached. Really interestingly, for the first time, the DfE guidance talks in much greater detail about what schools need to do when a child cannot attend school temporarily for safeguarding reasons. For example, where pupils may need to be kept separate following an incident or allegation. The guidance also makes a really important distinction between exclusion and temporary separation for safeguarding purposes. In the past, some schools may have unintentionally blurred those lines. The new guidance is much clearer that safeguarding separation is not an exclusion and must be managed differently. This matters because schools now need to think very carefully about how they manage these situations operationally, how decisions are recorded, how education continues to be provided, and how safeguarding responsibilities are maintained for all pupils involved. The guidance also gives greater protections to children in care, places a greater emphasis on pupil voice when considering off-site provision and managed moves, and also places more emphasis on governors or trustees to scrutinise and challenge the data around exclusions and pupil movements. Reading the new statutory guidance, I have to say I felt positive. There is a much stronger focus on unlawful exclusions, on off-rolling, with greater scrutiny around part-time timetables, informal exclusions and managed moves. It shows a greater movement towards empathy, understanding and meeting the needs of the pupils and parents while still maintaining the school's authority to keep people safe. Something which I and everyone at CPI are passionate about. With all this in mind, it is going to mean a greater emphasis on schools being more inclusive and being able to evidence that they have tried a range of strategies and interventions before reaching that last resort of permanent exclusion. The guidance repeatedly reminds schools that exclusion should sit within a wider culture of support, intervention and inclusion, not simply punishment, which with budgets stretched as they are at the moment is not easy. So what can we do? Here at CPI Education, we always challenge the schools we work with to think about the why behind behaviour. If we can figure out the why and the cause of behaviour which doesn't meet our expectations, then we can put strategies and interventions in place which can treat the cause rather than the symptom. As Desmond Tutu said, we cannot keep pulling people out of the river. We must walk upstream and find out why they are falling in. Let's find ways to do this. Let's look at the root causes of behaviour, understand them, and then change our practice to help meet the needs of the children. After all, our behaviour is the only behaviour we can truly control. One of the ways we help people control that behaviour is through self and co-regulation, keeping the emotional centre of our brain in check and being guided by the rational part, training ourselves to use scripted, assertive language, helping us to stay rational, not freestyling and responding emotionally, often making situations worse when a pupil hasn't met our expectations. Because behaviour influences behaviour. The emotional state of adults will directly impact the emotional state of children. I often ask a school a simple question. Do staff and pupils actually share the same understanding of expectations? Because if those perceptions are different, conflict becomes much more likely. We also believe in making any consequence for behaviour a constructive one. There has to be a consequence for behaviour, that's life. However, if we can put a consequence in place that helps the pupil reflect and learn from the incident, and hopefully not repeat it, if this can happen effectively, then hopefully we never reach the point of last resort. Before this guidance becomes statutory in September, I would recommend ensuring your behaviour exclusion consequences policy, or whatever name it has in your setting, meets the new requirements and uses the same language as the new guidance. Brief your governors on their expanded role and ensure they understand their expanded role in scrutinising exclusion data, pupil movement and patterns within vulnerable groups. Schools should also review whether any current practices could unintentionally amount to an unlawful exclusion. Does everyone know what your school expectations are? Staff and pupils. Do you have things in place to help pupils and staff adhere to and enforce those expectations in a calm, consistent manner? Because if we can do that, then we reduce the chance of reaching the point of last resort. Do you have things in place such as reward and recognition systems, which are effective and encourage pupils to do the right thing? And if they don't, then do we have things in place which can help them to do the right thing in the future? Because ultimately the goal is not simply to reduce exclusions, it's to create environments where fewer children ever reach crisis point in the first place. If these changes have prompted conversations within your setting around behaviour, inclusion or safeguarding, CPI Education will be happy to support. Just get in touch using the details on screen now and let's talk. Thank you for watching and have a great day.